Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to today, the 14th of November, and the PPN London's Lunch and Learn event, which is a focus all today on workforce, on diversifying our profile and retaining our staff. So I don't know if, hopefully you can see me. My name is Estelle Moore. I'm PPN London Chair, and I'm really delighted to be joining you this afternoon. Thank you so much for dialing in. I'm hoping that if the Lunch and Learn concept has worked for us really well, people might join in, have a bite to eat, listen, and participate. That would be wonderful. So we're in the middle of PP Psychological Professions Week. Well, not quite in the middle. We've had a day already, very exciting day, starting with equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion, moving on to a whole range of presentations as the week goes on, with an in-person event tomorrow. Today, thinking around for PPN London, we're thinking about the workforce, and we're delighted to welcome some really important presenters who are busy thinking about workforce issues in a whole range of different ways across the region. So really delighted to be able to welcome Simon Draycott shortly, and some colleagues, Halima and Leanne, who've been working on the Aspiring Psychologist programme. And then to welcome Dr. Maeve Malley, who is working in Oxley's as a consultant systemic psychotherapist, to hear about the way she's been training psychological principles in her trust, which really exciting to hear about. And then from Nikki Hartigan and Stephanie Okwu, who are a couple of the workforce leads who are working in the region to think about how do we retain our staff, and a whole range of other things that workforce leadership means at the moment in the capital. So a very warm welcome to those presenters. You will see them shortly. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the programme. As I'm saying, we've got Aspiring Psychologist programme to hear about, and we will be inviting you to contribute via our Mentimeter. So to get a bit of feedback from you guys would be really, really helpful. We also then think about how we make sense of the lives of our service users with Maeve, and systemic training for non-psychological therapy staff. And we would invite you, if you've got questions for Maeve, to post them in the chat, or any other comments that you'd like to share, which would be really interesting and useful to us. And finally, then, how do we think about what psychological professions want and need from the NHS, and get some of those insights. And we'd love to end with an insight from yourselves about what you look for in a job. That would be really helpful. So just in case anybody dialing in isn't familiar with the psychological professions networks, we would just a very brief overview that there are 7 psychological profession networks in England. The PPN London was launched in 2021. Celebrating its 2nd year now this year. So it's a multi-professional network. We're aiming to provide a joined-up voice for the psychological professions in workforce planning and development, and to support excellence in practice. So the topic today is hopefully on the money for that. We're looking to connect psychological professionals, commissioners, experts by experience, or consultants with lived experience who work alongside us. Not everybody likes that term, experts by experience, and our stakeholders. And the most important thing at the centre of all of what we're doing is to think about the public voice. Why do we need a more psychological NHS? Because this is what the public has asked for. When we look at psychological interventions, there is evidence of effectiveness that's really important for psychological practice. It drives psychological intervention, makes a difference. It drives cost efficiencies, and we know that there's a lot of people out there who would like to be able to access a more psychological NHS who don't get the opportunity to benefit. So we've got work to do. And the shape that takes at the moment then is thinking about what the NHS long-term plan is saying we need to do with the psychological professions workforce. So the overall workforce for the NHS is a highly topical area, but psychological professions particularly needing to grow by between 24,000 and 26,000 posts by 2037. So we've got a lot of groundwork to do now in order to shape that expansion. And that expansion means more psychologists, more psychological therapists, and more psychological practitioners across our pathways. It means obviously more training in all of those areas, and particularly training psychological therapists and practitioners over the next 3 years. This gives us a commitment to review and potentially increase the 10-year forward plan gives us a commitment to even potentially increase this further as we learn more about how all of these professions will work together and work with others in a collaborative way across the NHS, how we might grow our apprenticeships when we grow our own workforce, and have this really strong emphasis on retaining those people that we've trained. So that's the context, and into this context we're going to invite Dr. Simon Draycott shortly to tell us about the Aspiring Psychologist programme and London's Community of Practice. So I'm going to hand over to Simon. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Estelle. Quick introduction of myself. Thanks for that. I'm Simon Draycott. I'm a consultant psychologist in West London Mental Health, well, as was Mental Health West, now West London NHS Trust, and one of the people who's been involved in the setting up of what we call Aspiring Psychological Professionals programs across London. And we're going to talk a little bit about what our experience with that has been, kind of a narrative, a history, which culminates in the most recent development of us setting ourselves up as a community of practices on the auspices of PPN London, to try to see if we can take this kind of work forward. And along the way, as I talk, I'm going to invite a couple of people with lived experience of being a graduate of these programs. So we'll be joined by Halima and Leanne, who will talk a bit about their experiences for a few minutes. It's probably more interesting than listening to me, so I will try to rattle through a few slides reasonably quickly. I think Estelle or Julio are controlling the slides, so I will simply do something like that, and the slides appear. Brilliant. This is where we kind of started. Many people will be familiar with this. This has happened across the country. We had experience, particularly we have this data in clinical psychology training programs, that we know as a profession we have been not as representative as we would like of the populations that we aim to serve. And this is some of the data that the clinical psychology training programs collate on this kind of question. This is a few years old, and I want to make sure I emphasize that I know all the training programs have been working incredibly hard to try to address these kinds of challenges over the last few years with some success. But a few years ago, this is what the picture looked like, that when people were applying to train as a clinical psychologist, the success rate for people coming from minoritized backgrounds was lower than that for majoritized backgrounds. People from areas of the country where there was less involvement in higher education were less likely to be successful in applications. People who had dependents who had caring responsibilities were less likely to be successful in applications. There were a number of obstacles along the way which created these kinds of difficulties, and one of them was a trend towards was becoming sort of voluntary work experience as a route into further training as a psychological professional, which was understandable, but something which was creating an extra obstacle for people coming from advantages which had less privilege. And that was contributing to some of the difficulties we were facing. So one of the ways that we tried to deal with this was by programs that were set up by Health Education England, as was, and now funded by NHS England in our case. The next slide. Also a little bit of the background of the people who were involved in this. So we all received some money that we bid for back in the day from Health Education England. There are a number of trusts across London that received this money. And it was predicated on the setting up of paid work experience programs to try to help people get a foothold in the professions and onto the professional pathway for people who might otherwise be lost to the professions. So we had that money to try to set these up across these trusts and others in London. This is not a comprehensive list, but this is a list of some people who along the way started getting together and talking about how we were doing this and what we were learning and what were the challenges and what could we share in terms of how to reach out to people who might fall within that remit. What could we learn from each other? What could we share across what we were doing so that we weren't all doing parallel things when we could be sort of joining together. So that's kind of where we started, kind of a loose accumulation of people with that kind of shared interest. If we move on to the next slide, we found now between us, we are now coming up to the 4th cohort. We've successfully run 3, and there's been a number of trusts who've been involved, which has increased over the years, people have been involved with that. We've talked a lot about how we might learn from best practice and trying to get less biased applications and try to reach out from people who might not think about trying to get into that pathway towards being a psychological professional, thinking about CBDs, thinking about reflective practice, basically trying to share our learning with each other and sort of come together to try and deliver these kinds of things. And along the way, we're in a slightly rough and ready way, and I'll show you some of this rough and ready data in a few minutes, tried to ask the question of, is this going in the right direction? Are we reaching out to the right people? Are we providing programs which are hitting the right mark? And one of the questions along the way that we've been thinking about is, we got this steer from Health Education England to think about people who might be lost to profession if their route in was via voluntary work, with a particular emphasis on the intersectionality between people from perhaps less financially privileged backgrounds, people from minoritized backgrounds, and people with caring responsibilities. But it wasn't intended to be targeted in that kind of way. And there are a number of other ways that people might find themselves struggling to get into the pathway towards professions that we've been thinking about along the way, including neurodiversity, for instance, and disability. We can move on to the next slide. So I'll go through, this is very rough and ready data, so apologies for this, but to give you a rough sense of how we have been doing and how we have been going with this. This is based on a sample of about 57 people across a number of trusts who've been able to sort of share data. But the exact number where we've got data on different questions varies, so I've expressed these all as percentages for you. And I would put a particular question mark over that first bar there, but just to give you a rough sense, when we've tried to get a sense of whether people, whether we are supporting people who are coming from more disadvantaged backgrounds, the question mark over that is it's very hard to think of a way of assessing that which is objective and fair. But in our kind of rough and ready approach and trying to do this, that's the kind of figure that we're coming to. And the overlap between that and people coming from minoritized backgrounds, of course, there's going to be some intersectionality there. The things that struck me in particular as we've looked at this kind of data is the very low numbers of people we've supported through this program so far who describe themselves as having disability or having caring responsibilities, not just in terms of childcare, but thinking in terms of people who might qualify for carers benefits and support, for instance. And there's more to be done in how we can try to support people coming from those kinds of backgrounds. Another thing that struck us is that there are quite a number of people who've come through this who have no clinical experience whatsoever. We've caught people reasonably early on that might have been lost, but there are quite a number of people, a little over half, who have some previous experience. I've not broken this down yet in terms of how many of those people had built up voluntary work experience, because it was our remit for these programs, is to try to help people who would be struggling to be able to achieve a pathway from that. And I'll come back to questions at the end. Please do hold on to that question I just saw. So this is an open question to me to come back in terms of whether we've been able to support people from backgrounds where they might struggle to get onto the pathway if they had to take that voluntary work experience route. If we go on to the next slide. Getting a little bit into some of the data. This is a smaller subset of data across the trusts where we shared a survey and use the same questions to try to assess people's experience of the program. So you can see people are saying that they've had a very positive experience, although I will encourage Helen and Leanne to also share a kind of warts and all experience, because there are learning points as we've been going along. Next slide.
That's that.
And here we're thinking in terms of people's confidence, the impact of this, firstly in their sense of whether their background is going to be something that will impact their ability to get into a psychological profession down the line. So the majority of people, the vast majority of people, when they came into these programs, and again, this is across several trusts, felt that coming from the difficulties, the difficult background, the apologies, if people keep themselves muted, that would be appreciated. Coming from backgrounds of some disadvantage might make it harder to get into the professions. And we've not got to the point where people are feeling that this is not going to have an impact, but some of those senses softened. The experience of being able to give them over the periods of work with us has helped them to feel that they will have a better chance of being able to get their foot onto that ladder. Next slide. And you can see that most clearly here, where people, when they're coming into these programs, where they're going to have usually about 6 months of 3 days a week work experience with us and other trusts across London, are feeling that their confidence in their ability to make applications for future jobs, or to be able to get a job in a psychological profession or a pathway to a psychological profession, people feel a lack of confidence. But by the end of that, we are putting people in a position where they're feeling that they are in a good position to be able to make those kinds of moves. Next slide. This is where we're looking more at the proof of the pudding. I try to be fair with this because there's people we're still following up. So that yellow slice there is people where we're still trying to see where they've ended up. But of the people we have followed up, you can see that two-thirds of the total, including the people we've not talked to yet, have got themselves onto a substantive role, like maybe as a PWP, an assistant psychologist. It's not necessarily headed towards being a clinical psychologist, but that we decided quite early on that's not necessarily our main focus. We want people to be headed towards the psychological professions as a whole. We have some people who are a small slice who are developing further experience in a mental health professional role, but not a psychological profession, a healthcare facilitator, for instance. And a small number of people, I think that particular number, I think it's 2, who've decided that they don't actually want to try to pursue a career as a psychological professional, which we don't consider to be in any sense of failure. This is people who've been able to give them a chance to have an experience of what this work might be like, and they've come to a conclusion that actually it's not for them. And that's it's fair, and a decision they might not be able to come to with any evidence if we've not been able to give them that experience. So if we go to the next slide, what I want to do at the moment is hand over firstly to Halima, who will tell us a little bit about her experience on the Tavistock and Portman program. Halima, I don't believe, is employed now by Tavistock and Portman. That's where you gained your experience. And then we'll hear from Leanne, who had an experience of the program in the South West London St George's. So over to you, Halima.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Halima. So I was at the Tavistock Aspire program. I was then employed by Tavistock, and now I'm at Barnet Enfield and Haringey as an assistant psychologist. So I thought I'd just start off with some background information. So I'm South Asian. I come from a working class background, and the reason I applied was because I wasn't able to commit to any voluntary work to gain clinical experience. I also have lived experience of being a CAMHS inpatient, which resulted in me doing some CAMHS co-production work at the Tavistock. So a lot of my work is inspired in co-production. So when I was reflecting on this, I guess the main word that kept on coming up was access. So I think the Tavistock did a really good job in exposing me to different ways of psychological thinking, how to appropriately use supervision. I was even exposed to some CBT and delivering some CBT-based sessions. And so I've obviously had a lot of skills that I can now transfer into my current role as an assistant psychologist at Barnet. And also I'm a part-time research assistant, which also I transferred a lot of skills in terms of doing service evaluations and research, other types of research. So I transferred those skills. I think mainly the fact that I know that I am unrepresented in this area of work helped me to be a bit more curious in how to improve implementation and accessibility of psychological support for service users, and that resulted in me doing a systematic review, which hopefully is going to get published soon, in accessing psychological support in crisis resolution home treatment teams. So it's really helped me refine my research interests as well. So I think when I think about everything that I've learned, mainly I think the fact that I'm now reflexive and I've been able to become more respectful and truly understand what it means to be culturally competent in every single part of experience that I received, both clinical and research. So I think when I was giving those CBT-based sessions, I started thinking about intersectionality and how to adapt CBT principles to be more inclusive of Western models and things like that. So I definitely learnt a lot. I think also when I was reflecting, being in a clinical setting for the first time was a bit nerve-wracking. So this was my first psychological post ever. I was a healthcare assistant before joining the Tavistock, but I didn't have a lot of clinical exposure. I did feel like the team maybe didn't know what to do with me when I came in. I kind of just walked in and they were like, there's a new member, yay. And then I really had to make effort to find projects, and it was a complex service. There was a perinatal service, so there was a lot of things that I wasn't able to join in on, which I would have liked to, just because of the sensitivity of cases. So I did think their team did a really good job of getting me involved with service evaluations and projects and things like that. But I think on reflection, it would have been nice to have a clear job description before walking into that setting. And then also when I was reflecting on my experiences, I did find I was a bit concerned on how others saw me. So I think there was a little bit of insecurity about being considered someone who was employed for diversity. And I did discuss this with other Tavistock employees who were on the programme too. And I guess when I thought about it, I thought, oh, am I a bit undeserving of this post? It can feel a little bit undermining. So I think I've heard disadvantaged Aspire programme or something like that before. And I just thought about the wording and language used about these sort of posts and how that can make applicants feel. So I think the Tavistock team did a really good job of reassuring us through reflective practice that this was not the case and that we were employed for our skill set, and how we answered in an interview and things like that. It was just mainly the wording of job advertisements. Yeah, so I guess that's pretty much it. I think on the last note, I am pursuing clinical training this year for the first time, fingers crossed. So I don't think I would have applied this year if I didn't have the Aspire post. So it's really helped me become more confident to apply, and also has given me a career path for doctoral training. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Halima. And then I'd like to bring in Leanne at this point, who'll be talking about her experience from the South West London St George's programme.
Hi everyone, I'm Leanne. I'm one of the assistant psychologists working at the Wandsworth CAMS Tier 3 team. So just to give you a bit of background as well, I'm Lebanese. I moved from Lebanon to the UK a couple of years ago for my master's and to continue pursuing my career here because there weren't as many opportunities back home as well. So my experience with the Aspire program was actually really great and really insightful. And I think the kind of main thing that I found so useful was some of the CPD sessions that Yvette Arthur, the Aspire lead, was running, and having that space for myself and my other Aspire AP peers to come together and to kind of discuss some of our experiences, to have reflective spaces, to kind of discuss any issues that have come about, and to be able to do that in an honest way, and for it to be received like in a great way, and that, you know, any kind of issues that we had were taken into consideration and they were, you know, resolved, or that we had the support, the option of support from our Aspire lead if we needed it. And even though my 6 months have ended now and I've renewed my contract within my service, if that our Aspire lead is still running certain reflective group practices and has still been so supportive in helping us out and kind of encouraging us and being an advocate for us in the trust, as well as for this program specifically, which I think is so useful to have, especially as somebody who's, you know, coming in from, I guess, what is termed as like an unqualified post or position. So having someone as an advocate in the trust that can kind of help or be a voice for us was incredibly useful. I think also coming from Lebanon and kind of having no idea about like the NHS system, about different like career paths for me to get into clinical psychology, kind of made my, I guess, path to getting onto this a bit difficult at first. But then when I had seen the program, I really felt like this is the first post that I'd seen that felt like a good fit for me in terms of the previous experience that I had, and in terms of, I guess, in a sense, my lack of experience or knowledge about the NHS systems, or how to get in, or, you know, how to have access to the system or know of any of the rules or just any of the information. I kind of didn't have that and had to figure it all out on my own. So I think also one of the kind of key things was the CPD sessions, particularly the Tree of Life CPD session. And I found it incredibly valuable because it's all about how our personal identities and in part intersectionality comes into our professional lives. And it was really great to kind of see my own and all of my other peers and their own stories of what led them there, and how their personal life will continue to come into their professional life, and how to really navigate that and think about that and reflect on it and how it might affect your service users. So like Halima was saying, kind of really making you feel confident in your cultural sensitivity or competencies in that way, and really thinking and being reflective about how that plays into work, and thinking about my identity as an Arab woman within the NHS, within the UK and the system as a whole, and how that, you know, might play a role with the service users I interact with, as well as my colleagues, and my role in the system, and kind of how that can progress in the future. And then I would say another kind of really great positive for me was listening to experiences from some of the previous trainees that had gone on to the doctorate and were now working in the trust, and hearing their advice, and also just having great guidelines that we were given from like the BPS, for example, of what requirements you're entitled to, or what things that you can do as an assistant psychologist, parts of the job description or role, and things, criteria that you should be gaining, and knowing how to ask for that based on that within our own placements, knowing what we're entitled to and what we're allowed, such as time for professional development, etc., which I found really valuable. I think the one thing about the scheme that could be improved is maybe in the future allowing it to be full-time as opposed to part-time, although the part-time was nice to, it kind of gave space and to transition into like a working week. But I think it can be quite difficult when you're only working 3 days a week and you're living in London from a financial perspective, because we're trying to become financially independent, and it can obviously be quite difficult only working part-time and having to find other job roles to continue to kind of make a living within London. But that was kind of my experience overall.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Liam. I'm very, very grateful to you both for being brave enough to speak in front of a reasonably large audience. And I think that was probably the most interesting part of what we'll be doing in this section. So what I'll do is finish off quite briefly. It's just where we need to stick to time. So if we can swim all the way to the last of my slides. So we can skip on to the next one. That's just to let people know where we're going from this. So what we've been doing is a group of, originally a group of people who were trying to work together to work out and feel our way through how we might be able to provide these programs, and hopefully give you a sense of why these are valuable. I think is where we can go next, to try to give this a firmer foundation, to give it some stability, and also link it more closely with all the work other people are doing, particularly within the PPN and within PPN London. So we've been successful, and thank you to Estelle for support with this in setting ourselves up as a community of practice. This is very, very new, so we're still trying to work out exactly what our role is going to be and how we will connect with all the other bits of work that are going on within the PPN around issues of equity, issues of development. But our particular focus, we want to try to remain on how we support people who are aspiring psychologists, who might be coming from underrepresented backgrounds, into that professional pathway, and finding ways of doing that. We have some ideas about what things we might do at a very early stage, partly building what we're already doing, trying to demonstrate the value of these kinds of programs, to try to promote them across London, across trusts, to try to see if we can give them some stability and some longevity, but also sharing widely what we've learned about outreach, about less biased selection, about how you can help try to reach out to people who might otherwise be lost to us, who might help us as a profession to be more representative of the people that we want to be supporting in the community. I will draw a line under there, just make sure we stay to time. I know we're a couple of minutes over. Apologies for that, Estelle. I'll need to duck out in a minute, but if there's any particular things that I can help with before I do that, then I'll hang around. I'm afraid I need to go and teach some aspiring psychologists, actually.
Okay, so, which is wonderful. Thank you. I just want to say a huge thank you. I've stopped sharing my screen for a moment because we were going to be inviting you to just have a quick check on the chat about if there were questions that there was one you wanted to come back to, Simon, which is around where the data came from, wasn't it? Around all the trusts, or all the trusts that we reached out to. That was the first thing. Did you want to just comment on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been very cheekily sort of answering some questions in the chat. But that particular one, there's a number of trusts who've worked together to share data, and we're working with a number of others as well. So it's not just West London. It includes, but it's not constricted to CNWL, SLAM, and South West and St George has also contributed some data. And you can see Evan Arthur, for instance, with us today on my screen. So thank you to the people who have worked hard to try to pull that data together for this presentation. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, as you say, it's absolutely brilliant to hear from Halima and Leanne directly about some really interesting food for thought there about what we might do differently. Naming particularly is a really interesting one, isn't it? We've invited you. I hope you've got access to phones. Thanks, Simon. That's fantastic. I'm just thinking we were inviting people to join in a little bit on the Mentimeter. If you've got access to your phones, you could join us on that, or onto the internet. We've got a couple of questions that we'd love to hear from you. I think they posted a bit earlier by Julio into the chat. So, or do I need to supply a code, Julio? Okay, so hopefully it'll be available to you. Right. So whilst we're just I'm just going to come back to the chat if there's anything else whilst we invite you to have a look at the Mentimeter. So we'd be interested in what your thoughts were about that, and what might have inspired you listening to to what Halimi and Leanne had to say. So as we gather that data, I'll need to swap to Julio's screen. Just coming back, how is everyone finding the journey? Yeah, so Paul saying, yeah, how's everyone finding the funding journey as people try to juggle learning, exams, and life in general? Thank you, Paul, expert by experience from the West Midlands. Yes, so it was really important point around living in London on a part-time wage. I think that that Leanne just made really importantly there. But it is, I think, I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that. If you wanted to say any more, Halimi, you might not wish to, but just on the getting through. Just looking, applaud paid placement to access the professions. That's really helpful. Thank you for that from Anne, as a student. Yeah. Or Halima, yes, you did.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to agree with Leanne. I think, I mean, I live in Hertfordshire, and getting that training 3 times a week alongside, and then also just working 3 times a week and finding something else to balance that out with was a bit difficult. It would be great if we could see more full-time roles for this. And then I think also I was really lucky that the Tavistock then employed me after, but I know that was not the case for a lot of people. So maybe having employment opportunities after aspiring programs that followed through from it. So yeah,
I think that's a really good point, Halima, because I think we're going to be, I think that's definitely part of the follow-up, isn't it, Simon, that we're looking at what happens next for people. Would that be the correct? Yeah, Yvette is on.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's part of the. Yeah. Apologies, I will need to duck out at this point. So,
okay.
But I'm very willing, if people have any questions that I might be best placed to answer, to try to catch up somehow to disseminate an answer later on.
Amazing. Okay, so I don't know if we can turn to the Mentimeter. Just so I'm not showing my screen, but Julio will be. So just having a quick look at the Mentimeter, if we can see if there's anybody's been able to join in and what's coming up. So thank you for your engagement with that. So what are you most encouraged by about the Aspiring Psychologist programme? So we had a ranking system here. So just from you guys in the audience there, that the selection criteria includes groups that we haven't reached out to before. I'm going to say the word disadvantage with caution from now on, because I think we need to come back to that. But so groups that may not have had the same opportunity. Is more important in some ways than, well, it's growing actually. The early career development is catching pace. So I think it was really clear from what Halima and Leanne said that it's something about, you know, that the process of getting into professions and having support for that, and then support to learn as you once you're in there, is really clearly very important. And then yes, data and data collection is the sort of thing that get some people's vote, but not everybody. But so yeah, but it is important that we have the data around the pipeline into the workforce. So some people can worry about that, like myself probably, but much more importantly, how we outreach to a range of people who bring amazing things. I was just thinking what Halima said about the skill set that she's bringing into her CBT work, having had experience of services from a whole range of ways of it, you know, encountering them. That's just brilliant to hear about. So oh, there's a lovely question from Stephanie there about whether people would have preferred shorter placement with full-time hours. That's another thing we could be exploring, isn't it? Thank you. It's a lovely question, Stephanie. All of your questions are really much appreciated, everybody that's engaging there. Just one more, we will come back to, you know, learning from those. In relation to the next item on the Mentimeter, can I just have a look about hearing from the graduates? Just waiting for responses then on what has inspired you guys the most, listening to graduates of the AP programme. So some responses will come in shortly, I'm hoping. Yeah, so I don't know if that's a thumbs up from, yeah, some ideas around how we might organise placements differently from more than one network. Good to see you, Suzanne, there. Right, so improving access to gaining clinical experience is something that, yes, might be really important to a number of people, particularly in the sort of yes, getting into training or future trainings. But hearing about the benefits and of the experience and its impact is really inspiring. Important to think about a range of EDI characteristics, just thinking about equity, diversity and inclusion, and some of the barriers that people face and how we can make those much more equal for all. So being from different backgrounds and accessing competitive roles. Yeah, so how do we, it was really a lovely film that was shown yesterday in the EDI session, looking at the importance of equity in our understanding of access to professions as well as services. So something really important to be working on in our commitment to EDI principles moving forwards. So these are brilliant things. It's really helpful to hear. And thank you so much to all of you for engaging in that. Please feel free to carry on contributing, because all of this data goes forward to helping us understand as a network what's working for people and what's not. So some really helpful insights today. So if it's all right, keep sharing, and there's a Mentimeter later to come back to too. So we'll be I think in view of time, I'm going to move on. So thanks everybody. I'm going to reshare my screen again. 1 second, and come back to the next item on our on the programme, which is how we might make sense of the lives of our service users using a systemic training. And a very warm welcome to Dr. Maeve Malley, who's a consultant systemic psychotherapist working in the acute mental health services in Oxley. So over to you.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for asking me to come. Really interesting listening to Simon, Halima and Leanne. I think that some of what I'm going to be talking about will be looking at some different aspects of accessibility for service users and for other clinicians to psychological therapy's ideas. First slide, please. So let me tell you a story. In 2019, some colleagues and I went to the European Family Therapy Association conference in Naples. I mean, Naples, of course we went. We actually did go to present something useful. We were talking about initial family meetings. If you want to know anything more about anything I say in the slides, feel free to email me. I know you're getting copies of the slides and I'll be kind of cantering through them. So do feel free to email me. I'm a systemic therapist, and I believe that you can't understand somebody's difficulties or their solutions without understanding the context of their lives, their familial lives, their cultural lives, their societal lives. I also believe that any impact that we'll have on them will be massively smaller than the impact of the people around them, their significant others. Therefore, what we will do will be a tiny drop in the ocean if we don't address the wider context of their lives and preferably see them with their significant others. Next slide, please. So, at the Naples conference, I went to a workshop by Professor Laura Frugeri. I knew of her work before. She's a great speaker, and she's particularly good at making horribly complex concepts much simpler. Systemic psychotherapy, like most psychotherapy probably, is awash with horribly obscure and complex concepts. I think sometimes it is because the ideas are complex, and sometimes it's a kind of protectionism, I imagine, to make sure that other people can't understand these concepts, and only we can. Systemic psychotherapy, like most psychotherapeutic modalities, involves a horribly long and expensive training. Therefore, it's not exactly accessible to loads of people. Next slide, please. So, why systemic ideas are important? This is a slight diversion, but it's important to these ideas. My trust, like loads of others, has got a stated aim to try and involve significant others in its services. We know the evidence base for mental health services really prescribes the involvement of significant others to increase the effectiveness of all treatment for nearly all difficulties. We know that most services get most complaints from significant others. We know that serious untoward incident reports involving suicide, deaths, murders often talk about a lack of involvement of an individual's wider relational network. We're just not very good at working out how to involve relational networks. I also think we have a bit of a tunnel vision. And when we think about relational networks, we only think about families. And frankly, at most of our clients' age in adult mental health, they don't necessarily want their mum and dad involved. They may want partners, ex-partners, flatmates, employers, drug dealers, people they drink with, their bookies. I have involved all these people in systemic therapy, and they're enormously helpful. So we have to think in a slightly more wide way about who are people's significant others. Next slide, please. Okay, so back to the training after that slight sidebar. So, sorry, can we, here we are. So, why systemic ideas? Why don't we just ask clinicians to involve significant others in their work? It really doesn't work. I've worked in Oxley's for 12 years, and Oxley's, I think, has worked.
Oh, I think we've lost me for a moment there. Hopefully able to get back to you. I don't know if others can hear me.
I can hear you okay.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, yeah. But
Can't hear Maeve.
no, not Maeve, okay. Just dropped out for a moment. These are some of the troubles of technology and Wi-Fi. Hopefully we'll be able to return. I can't carry on because I think I'm too mid-story and too interested myself. I'm just hoping we will get Maeve back. So what's our plan? Just pausing a moment because sometimes we do people can get back in. Perhaps if we continue with what Maeve was going to say in terms of it not being rocket science, systemic therapy being based on a theory of mutual influence, assuming that human beings are inherently relational. Lovely quotes. I guess hopefully if Maeve dials back in, we'll be able to hear the rest of the journey. Wondering if we can't carry on without Maeve, I don't think. Just pausing for a moment. Hopefully, I don't know. I don't know if Stephanie, are you on the line? Are you? Let me just have a quick. I would stop showing my screen a moment, just see if Stephanie's there. Yeah, is there anything that was Maeve dialing in from a different place than Oxley's? I don't know if there's anything about yeah, you are. Okay, all right. That's a shame. Hopefully coming back.
Reaching out to her on my phone.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. With the best laid plans, huh? I'm going to say talk about lunch. I'm just wondering if I can come back to have to wait for her to return. Just looking into the chat at some of the things that people were saying earlier, whether we can pick up some of those. There's so much I'm sort of then being confusing about where we go with that. Oh dear. Because we were going to be hearing about how some of the ideas from Naples had been applied. I think that was the key thing, wasn't it, with Maeve? Okay, I'm wondering if it would be too tricky to jump to our what do the psychological professionals want and need from the NHS and come back to Maeve's journey. I'm just wondering if that might need to happen if we've literally lost her. Oh dear. Okay. Is that unreasonable? Nikki and Stephanie, I can see Stephanie's here. I'm just wondering if Nikki's also here. Hi.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
I don't know if we have to just just say we'll move on and
Yeah.
hope that Maeve can join us again. So yeah, okay. So how about we do that? And with every respect, Maeve was presumably trying to get back in another way. We'll just pause on that and hope that we'll hear the rest of the journey shortly. So
I bet
yeah.
her laptop has stopped and it's doing an update or
Okay.
something. That's happened to me before, and there's just nothing you can do about it. You just have
Nothing.
to wait till it's
Yeah,
finished,
nothing
which
we can
is
do.
achingly awful when you're in the middle of a presentation.
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. It is so tricky, isn't it? I'm sure it's happened to more than one person. But yeah, and this is so it's a wonderful advantage to have, you know, to be able to gather together like this, isn't it? But at the same time, there are some trickinesses about it. Okay, so thank you very much for bearing with us, all of you. What I think we might do then is hopefully we'll get back to Maeve, but we'll just hear, perhaps we'll move on to hearing from Nikki Hartigan and Stephanie Oku, who I've already introduced as the workforce leads, two of the workforce leads in London, who'd worked with Fuzia, hadn't you, Siddiq, in CNWL. So if I go back to the slides and hand over to you to take us forwards with your presentation on that, just 2 seconds. And hopefully think about, yes, what do psychological professionals want to need from the NHS? Over to you, Nikki. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you. So hello, and thanks for having us here to talk about our roles as psychological workforce leads. And we thought it'd be interesting for us to share some of our initial insights from our roles into what are the themes emerging around what psychological professionals want and need in order to kind of stay and flourish in their roles within the NHS. And yeah, I should say, my name's Nikki Hartigan and I'm a workforce lead for West London for the Community and Recovery Mental Health Services. So I'm not completely trust-wide. Some of the workforce lead roles in other trusts are. In West London, we've kind of begun it in a smaller part of the trust.
And my name is Stephanie Oku. I'm a counselling psychologist and a workforce and CPD lead for Oxley's NHS Foundation Trust. And my role is trust-wide as well, as is Fuzia's, who unfortunately can't be with us today. So we'll be speaking on her behalf.
Brilliant. Welcome both. So I'll move the slides on. Is that okay with you both? Yeah. Thank you.
So how I've made sense of my role, at least, I've been in roles since August of this year, and it's kind of thinking about the ethos or the philosophy of the directorate that I work in. And so, for example, at Oxley's, it's a really it's a great emphasis on innovation. It's a trust that isn't scared to try new things, and there's a great emphasis on support in the management system, and also around encouraging autonomy towards the staff in the directorate as well as collaboration. I've really noticed that there is such a value that's placed on all the voices and all the opinions of staff in the psychological therapies directorate. So as I said before, it's thinking about the philosophy of the directorate and then thinking broadly about the values of the trust. So at Oxley's, again, just using that as an example, our trust rhymes, our trust values rhyme, so it makes it a bit easier to understand or to remember. And the trust values are we're kind, we're fair, we listen and we care. And then thinking broadly again, thinking a bit more of a macro level about what the NHS wants to kind of achieve, what NHS England wants to kind of push forward in its agenda. And as was mentioned before, about how to increase accessibility to mental health services for people of distress and also staff as well. And then also thinking about the variety of psychological professional roles within the NHS and the people who kind of assume those roles too. So we hold all these things in mind, but then we use it to inform the 5 key areas of our work, which is recruitment. So how do we recruit people into post? How do we retain the staff that we have? How do we think about the well-being of our staff? So thinking about staff holistically and not just as, you know, kind of worker bees. Thinking about engagement as well, and that's kind of considering something like this, so PP week, and then also thinking about development too. So yeah, that's just kind of a bit of a broad kind of conceptualization of the work that we do, and then Nikki's going to draw out some ideas or some more tangible things that we work on.
Yeah, so as Stephanie's kind of highlighting, there's lots of kind of tactical types of interventions that a workforce lead role might involve, such as outreach to schools or colleges, attending job fairs, reviewing our job descriptions and job adverts, job plans, and kind of reviewing the posts across the piece in the trust in psychological professions. So there's lots of kind of practical tasks that a workforce lead might be involved in. However, the really kind of crucial thing that we're doing is we're kind of holding the space to understand the issues across those 5 key areas at the local level. So in a way, we're doing what we would do with our clients. We're looking at what are the presenting difficulties, what's the emotional temperature within the organisation at the minute, what can we do to address any key areas of concern, and who do we need within the organisation and what do we need them to do to help us with this. So this involves gathering lots of data from multiple sources, such as we might do staff interviews, we might run focus groups, we look at administering surveys to our staff where they can be kind of free and honest with the feedback that they give us. We might look at workforce type data, so leavers data, sickness rates, staff turnover rates, so multiple different data sources. And also we might look at broader like national and regional data for comparison. So not only how is your trust doing, but how is your trust doing in comparison with kind of other similar organisations. So this is a really great job for a psychologist because we're trained in assessment, in information gathering, in pulling together lots of diverse bits of data, in audit and in formulating plans of action. I suppose it's just that more ordinarily we would be doing that with an individual or a couple or a group of clients as opposed to a group of psychologists or a psychological workforce. In recognition of the varied needs of psychological professionals at different stages of their career, some trusts have separated out the role, I believe, into early stage and later stage. Is that the case in your trust, Stephanie, or is yours across the stages?
Mine across the stages and the trust. And
I think perhaps it's SLAM where they have separated it out into late stage and early stage workforce lead. But really just to emphasise that the focus is in considering our psychological workforce needs in a kind of bespoke way and a meaningful way that's well matched to the reality of their roles and their current circumstance. A key focus of the work is ensuring that everyone, no matter their background, their race, gender, sexuality, or all forms of diversity, everyone has an equal opportunity to both enter and to flourish within the NHS psychological workforce. So that's threaded through all of the more kind of tactical and practical interventions we might do. And once all these separate sources of data have been kind of understood and gathered, and would develop a long-term strategy from those, this is continuously reviewed and assessed ongoing in terms of whether the interventions that we're doing are moving us in the direction that we want to go in. So we thought it would be useful to maybe share some bits of the data that we've gathered and the insights that we've developed from this so far, which may have wider applicability and relate to your services and your thinking in your own places of work. So when I started in this role in West London, that was the beginning of this year, I had quite a lot of assumptions about what the challenges the Trust and the CAMS services would be facing in terms of workforce engagement and wellbeing, and also with recruitment and retention. So obviously we were coming out of the back of a few years of COVID. Our service had undergone significant transformation of services, so lots of organisational change. And this on a backdrop of kind of widespread industrial action and strikes regarding NHS pay and conditions. And I suppose additionally to that, and really accelerated by COVID, the rise of remote working, particularly remote therapy and accessibility of psychological professionals kind of pivoting into the private sector, working remotely with clients. So I suppose I had some preconceived ideas about what data I'd received back and what the challenges would be to the workforce. Can you show the next slide, Estelle? Oh, the previous slide to that. Yeah, here we go. So when I started to gather information about the workforce, I was fairly surprised about what I found. So this data is kind of an amalgamation of surveys, interviews with service leads, data from HR relating to current psychological professionals within the CAMS services. So I found 85% of current psychological professionals in those services who returned the survey. So not everybody did, of course, but those who did indicated their intention to remain in their post. 2 people intended to leave, but for lifestyle reasons, so positive attrition, you know, they were leaving to go travelling, not because they didn't want to necessarily stay in their role or in West London. And others were unsure. So nobody who returned the survey said they definitely were planning to leave or had intention to leave in the next 12 months. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive about the support from the psychological professionals within the teams, overwhelmingly positive about the management from psychological professionals in their teams. Leadership is perceived to be strong and effective, and training opportunities are good and highly valued. So I was really curious then about whether things like pay, day-to-day issues with things that come up, and I had heard kind of staffing services mentioning like lack of access to parking, sometimes less than adequate kind of buildings or material surroundings in services, and how much these mattered. So essentially wanting to find out what matters most and where therefore as workforce leads we should concentrate our focus in building a workforce and a culture that people want to come to and want to stay in. So of all the bits of things that people had mentioned in interviews and surveys, I created this list of 10 things, and I wanted all the people who had said they intended to stay in their role to priority rank which was most important. And I thought this really spoke volumes when I looked at how this all laid out. So this is everybody rated every item as what was most important. So in terms of what was most important to most people, we could see right at the top there, it's the psychological professions teams. That is, it's slightly missed off there, but teams, so the kind of the team around you matters most to the most people. The clinical workload, and this was with regards to complexity and volume, so how much work you have to do, and I suppose that goes hand in hand with the support that you're getting around that. And then third was the wider MDT and support from the wider team. And then moving down to promotion opportunities and training opportunities. So kind of, you know, what happens in work, how well you're supported to do what matters to you, and how much you're invested in terms of your development opportunities, coming out as really much more important to our workforce than issues that frequently get stated and raised, you know, as day-to-day kind of niggles and grinds, like access to parking not being great, or sometimes the physical environment inside your building being, you know, not as salubrious as perhaps it might be. So I suppose overall, could you click on to the next slide, Estelle? Thanks. Then we thought it'd be interesting to look at those coming into the psychological professions. So people who are just starting out on their journey into the psychological professions, who might be thinking about joining our workforce, what matters to them. So we were able to get some quite comprehensive data from the UCL Doctorate in Psychology, who survey all of their leavers every year. And so I've just highlighted the top two on here, which is what people who completed the survey, so just graduating from the doctorate in psychology, what were their fears about, well, what would put them off working in the NHS? So the main, you know, fears from this snapshot is that people are concerned that working in the NHS is going to be detrimental to their well-being. So they're worried that they're going to be stressed, overwhelmed and burnt out, and that it's not going to be a good place for them to work. Next slide, please. And despite the fears that people have about working in the NHS and what that might be like, we do know that the vast majority of psychologists and psychological professionals in training do intend to work in the NHS and remain in the NHS after training. And that's, I guess, because they believe in the mission and the purpose and the values of the NHS. So thinking about what people are actually looking for in a post and what would make a post workable and manageable in order to overcome some of those fears and concerns about what it might be like. And again, just a real kind of front loading of, after people have found a job that's in the clinical area that they're competent and specialised and interested in a place that they can get to, which were the top two factors, moving down from that, again, team working. So who's around you? How does it feel to be at work day to day? What is the team like? And what are the opportunities for ongoing development and progression? So I suppose in terms of what actually matters to people and what the data is telling us overall, we can see a pattern that what really matters beyond the kind of known broader landscape of the NHS challenges is the strong support, leadership, effective teams, and opportunities for people to grow and develop in their roles.
What we thought could be helpful is just to share some insights of what we've done in our individual trust that kind of speak to those more important kind of areas that Nikki was just talking about. So, for example, development, strong leadership and support. I'm going to start off with what we've been doing at Oxley's. So for a really long period of time, we've had a newly qualified group, and it supports newly qualified therapists kind of transition from that period of just qualifying and kind of having your qualification, but then also having all these new responsibilities and maybe not feeling as confident as maybe you would like to that point where you're a bit more established in your role and you feel a bit more confident in your skills and how to kind of manage your responsibilities. But in recent kind of times, we've had some difficulties with attendance. We've noticed that there's been quite a drop. So one of my aims when I started was to restart the program. And I was really thinking about it, and I thought that perhaps the best way to get the best level of engagement would be to create a program with the people who actually be using it. So I then held a focus group and we looked at the program as a whole. So we looked at the bigger kind of ticket items, so thinking about topics that we would cover had some really lovely ideas of maybe having service users present rather than only clinicians. And then also thinking about more of the finer things, so the time of day, what day, how many times a month we would want to meet. And then from our conversations, we kind of saw that a bigger program was needed. So something around welcome packs, because with Oxley's, and I know you can't tell from the name, but we're a South East London Trust, and we cover 3 boroughs, and then we also cover southeast of England and southwest. So it's quite a big swath of England that we cover. So it can be quite difficult for new people entering the trust to get their head around all the different services and all the different areas that we cover. So there was something around that, having a bit of a pack. Also just speaking about what it is to kind of hold that registration, what needs to be done to continue the registration or other memberships that the person can join or other kind of groups. And then there was also conversations around really enjoying that more kind of critical debate, and there's really lovely spaces where we come together and talk about things that we had at uni that we don't quite always have in the workplace, so finding ways to continue holding those spaces. And then other ways of just socializing, so with winter or summer socials. And then also, I was really keen to kind of think about how we can continue this engagement, continue this feedback loop that we started with the focus group. Next slide, please. And I'm going to speak on behalf of Fauzi, and hopefully I can do her slide justice. So this is kind of in response to the need for strong psychological leadership. I know at CNWL, they developed the 21st Century Leadership Programme, and this was in response to the feedback from the staff survey. They found that there was quite a call for compassionate leadership, maybe some things around inclusion and diversity and promotion and progression. So it started as a trust-wide management and leadership program, focusing on compassionate leadership through living our lives and modeling behaviors. And the program aims to create the compassionate leaders we so need so that we can best serve our communities. And from the conversations that I had with Fauzi about this project, or Nikki and I had with her, I know that quite a few people were kind of spoken to who helped to put the program together. I know they consulted Michael West, who is quite a big name in compassionate leadership. They also spoke with Mersey Care, who offered insight into their approach, which is the restorative and just culture model, which talks about moving away from a punitive or retributive culture to a culture that understands the injuries and wounds that exist within it and does what it can to nurture and to heal. And so they also weaved in NHS values, equality and diversity and inclusion ideas throughout the programme, and identified new ways to get below the surface of areas such as bullying and harassment, discrimination, recruitment bias, and conflict in teams, ensuring that the NHS is an organisation of choice for staff and an organisation of excellence for the people that we serve. And the programme offers a space for attendees to identify, understand and challenge system-wide complex problems to enable them to lead successfully in a constantly changing environment. And I believe I think it started this term, so maybe last month, that might have been the first one. Next slide, please, Estelle.
Sorry, I was still on mute there. So our practice example from West London, it's very topical at the minute because obviously we just had all of our new trainee psychologists starting in the last month. Thinking about support, and I suppose as much as support, kind of overall culture and engagement of the workforce, we really cognizant of the concerns of pre-qualified and newly qualified psychological professionals, essentially that the NHS is going to be detrimental for their well-being. And we're really keen to ensure that people see and feel that, you know, in this instance, West London, but more broadly, the NHS as a whole, is a place where they matter and where they will be included and they will be developed and they will be well supported and given opportunities. Excuse me. So in the service of that, we decided to start a monthly workshop programme. So we get our first year trainees for a year, and so providing a monthly workshop programme throughout the year-long placement. And really the aim of this is to support them to develop a strong kind of group identity and an identity as an NHS professional who works within the organisation of the NHS. I suppose more broadly supporting the supervisors in the trust, because as we, you know, need and want to expand the numbers of people that we train, to expand and broaden the workforce, that is an extra demand of time on the supervisors. So supporting them by adding some kind of extra supervision, extra training, development, inclusion for the trainees that are on placement with them. And really just making sure we set out our stall early regarding the trust values, and that there is, and if there's not, there's an expectation that there will be and there should be psychological safety for trainees and any psychologist or psychological professional coming into our workforce. So just being very clear and transparent about that. And if we're falling short, we want to know and we want to be told, and then we can address that. And on that kind of learning and development piece, so linking together all of the trainees who can feel quite isolated in their different bits of the service as the trainees. So yes, there'll be other psychological professionals, but with in mind what we were speaking about earlier, the needs of people at the beginning of their career can feel quite different to the needs of people later on. So just creating that kind of ongoing peer support space and peer identity for people at the beginning stage of their career. Next slide. Stephanie, were you going to say something about the beginning of that, or no? Should I just babble in?
Yeah, I'll do the final bit, but yeah, I guess I can say something to it. So I guess what Nikki's really highlighted is that, and what we've both kind of spoken about, is that it's not necessarily the building, although the building and parking and the location, so being nice to a really nice park can be really nice for breaks. It really is about the things that are within our gift to change that really matter. So the support that people receive when they're at work, the strength of the team, being able to have access to things that can further their development and further their skills are things that are really important. And these are the things that people really look for when they're looking for a place to work, and then also the reasons why they stay as well.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. You put that better than I could have. You explained that in a really lovely way. But I think, yeah, that is like was such a positive sort of learning experience, really, for me, that a lot of things are not easy to change, and you know, some things we just can't change. But even those things that take a bit more time and effort, and it's about understanding lots of bits of information and nudging lots of things in the right direction. If we get that right, it is within our gift to make the NHS a good enough place for people to want to come and show up and do their best every day, and it not be detrimental to their own well-being. And you know, I think that is kind of a really great thing about these roles, that we can persist in that endeavour, and we can keep our eyes on the horizon with that and keep making all the nudges in the place that they need to be made, so that, you know, we are consistently checking that we're on the right track with that, rather than just kind of hoping that it's good enough and people will carry on to put up with the more difficult things about NHS work.
Yeah, and then just I guess to further add to that, as Nikki was saying, there's something about the nature of our role that really enables us to keep a focus and to be really conscious and deliberate and strategic about the workforce needs that perhaps could, which are really important, but perhaps if there wasn't someone who was dedicated to that, could really fall by the wayside in terms of other things that seem a bit more important at the time. So because of our role, things that seem a bit broad or a bit vague or really nice in theory, but can seem a bit difficult to kind of distill into how we would do it in a more practical sense, we can kind of break things down into tangible and material goals, so that the workforce can get the support that they need in order to thrive in their roles.
Wow, that's a lovely, as you say, Nikki, what a lovely way to end in terms of thinking about thriving. That's lovely to hear. So I didn't know that we'd end up on the word thriving and thinking about working in the NHS at the moment. It's something that's really inspirational. Yes, absolutely. I just want to say a huge thank you to you both for that as a contribution. So I think it's really rich if we think about right across London, because as you say, there are other workforce leads working in a whole range of ways. These posts didn't exist 5 years back, so we are learning and we are thinking very much about how to support the expansion work, which is really exciting to hear. Brilliant. There may be, I haven't been able to keep an eye on the chat because I've been sharing my screen, but I've stopped doing that now because I'm just wondering if we could I just want to relaunch the Mentimeter to the audience, which I think Julio will do kindly for us. Yeah, so because we'd love to hear from all of you about why you do your roles. Oh, already there's some here. Okay, fantastic. So it's already launched. It's me getting thinking it wasn't there. So just what's most important to you in looking for a job in the NHS? I don't know, Stephanie and Nikki might want to comment as well, but this is really interesting. So we have got a range of people who've dialed in today. So paid work is critical. It may be really important in a different stage of career, isn't it? So if you're launching a career and trying to get a foothold, I think as Halima said earlier, in London, or I think Leanne in London, that you know we need some funding, and we might want to relook at that, wouldn't we, Steph? Sorry, Nikki. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, so is it right on this that the things that are biggest is what most people said? Or
I think with a word cloud, it's more if people have more people have said it, that you get a stronger kind of or a larger font. So yeah, paid work is coming up, has been said by more than one person, and the work-life balance. Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting if you look beyond that, not dismissing that, the importance of that, and I think that is something to do with the kind of stage of career that we're looking at. But if you look beyond that, it's essentially all about a kind of development opportunities and the support within the team, the psychological safety, the career progression, being valued, teamwork and inclusivity. It's, you know, yeah, it's kind of really chimes, I think, with what people have been saying within the surveys that we have been doing, the things that we need to get right. Yeah.
Really, really helpful, isn't it, to see that? I love, yeah, really interesting non-bullying management. Yeah, so just thinking about what the you know, what we've learned about what matters to people in their teams directly it comes through in the NHS survey across trusts, and it's certainly coming through here, isn't it? It's really important. Did you want to add anything looking at that, Stephanie?
Yeah, I guess what I'm seeing is that people just really want to bring themselves to work. They want to be able to bring their ideas, and they want work to also feel like an important part of their life, but not all of their life. And so there is some focus on definitely feeling valued and that work-life balance and that specialism. So, and yeah.
That's some really lovely points. Yeah, absolutely. And seeing people are saying in the chat that it's good to hear that there are people in the roles that you're doing. So that's really good. So I guess it might be something, you know, PPN's all about sharing what practice might work, and it has to be local, because the local context is so crucial. Stephanie's just saying there what it is about our own tree of life, our own journey that brings us to these places and spaces. So if you'd like to reach out to Nikki, Fuzia, or Stephanie, I'm sure we'd be welcoming that if there are trusts that, you know, thinking of setting up workforce leadership, and or any other information about the things that we've shared today. It'd be very welcome to reach out to us. I just must come back. Thank you for that. I'm just we'll leave that sitting there, because it's wonderful to see that, you know, to hear about what you're thinking. I want to say a huge thank you to Nikki and Stephanie for that, and to Fuzia for her contribution in the background, and also to Maeve, who we lost. Yeah, well done, guys. Thank you for that. Just thinking about Maeve and her story. So I'm feeling very I don't know what the right word is. I'm sorry that we didn't get to hear the end of Maeve's story, because it sounded brilliant. So I was just reading through some of the things that she would have been sharing with us, and just to end up with some of the insights that Maeve was sharing with us, because it is so good to hear from systemic therapists and all the others that contribute in the psychological professions. Maeve seemed to be saying to us, don't give up on a brilliant idea. And her brilliant idea was about sharing psychological practice in a way that's accessible and is not precious, and is not holding things back, but sharing it with the multidisciplinary team in a way that upskills everybody. And I think that was something about her message, although I haven't heard it fully. But I think what we might have to do is oh, Stephanie, you perhaps know more. Do you know more about that?
No, I've just been definitely messaging Maeve and presenting at the same time.
Yeah.
She was asking if I could read her slides, but there's a strike, or like a, what would you call it, electrical strike, or in East London. So yeah, or there's been a lightning strike in East London, so everything has been cut. So she's unable to join us. I don't know if there's any way to dial her back in, because she has access to her phone, but otherwise she's asked me to read her slides for her if we have enough time.
Well, Stephanie, thank you. It's good to know that there was a live event that presumably has meant that other people don't. Maybe it's happened to others who are dialing in from East London. So sorry about that, but it's good. Thank you very much for filling in. And we've got other things. Yeah, I think we don't have time necessarily to go right back, but I was just trying to distill a little bit. And Stephanie, you might want to correct me or say no, that wasn't the ethos. But I think there was something about upskilling everybody, and I think that is right on the money for Psychological Professions Week, because that's what it's about. Sharing, it's about sharing ideas and not giving up on brilliant ones. So I think maybe what we could do is invite Maeve back to finish the story at a future London PPN event, or perhaps through our newsletter. And I want to say thank you to all of you guys for joining us over the lunch period, for joining in the way you have, for helping us get those insights into what working in the NHS means to people at the moment, because that is so important for the workforce expansion agenda. Really very helpful to hear from you. And there are definitely a number of extra ideas in the chat. I'm just looking here. Somebody, Annabelle, is saying, thank you for sharing. We would like to follow on from what was said earlier, that there's some national research conducting into reasons why early career psychologists stay in work part-time or leave the NHS. So if you'd like to get in contact with Annabelle Harding at the University of East London, she'd be very pleased to hear from you. So that's a recommendation in the chat there. So just winding up as I might, just to say a huge thank you to everybody that has joined us today, despite electronic failures. I'm just going to say just a Thank you. Just at the end, so moving on from the summary about what's been so good to hear about in terms of workforce leadership and how we might make sure that we have an environment that people want to work in. To say thank you very much for your questions and comments, and we would be really pleased to hear your feedback. We've got a form that we'll send out to you for all of those who have joined today. We'd love to hear a bit more, and thank you for when we collate all the information from PP Week, Psychological Professions Week, we'll be looking at what you've said in the chat. So your engagement is really appreciated. I just want to say a signpost, a very final signpost. If you want to get hold of any one of us, you know where to do that in PPN London. This is us. This is the core team, but there's many others involved. We'd also like to say, please join us for the rest of Psychological Professions Week. So there's a major event in London tomorrow, and there's more on career pathways with Adrian Whittington and Phil Self towards the end of the week, and they are very widely knowledgeable, and it's good to listen to them. So you can dial in at any point to those once those sessions have been recorded. So thank you for your contribution today, and wish you all a very good afternoon. So